Greetings from Kiev.
Yeah, greetings. Thank you. So, speaking of greetings from Kyiv,
I just off very exciting show. I was just interviewing one of my very good friends and comrades, who is one of the commanders of Russian volunteer squadron who fights on the Ukrainian side. And he was for an hour. He was speaking live about what they saw and what kind of troops they encountered, what were the fights, and like it was really exciting, very interesting.
that's great. And since you're talking about that, let me just put the YouTube channel in the chat box there, and then I'll give the news feed on Telegram as well. Hold on a sec here. So I'm glad you said greetings from Kyiv because I have a question for you about sort of the mood in Kyiv. I was really kind of taken back by something I saw on Twitter this morning, which I shared with you. It's from a woman named Alexandra Zubal. And I don't know if you know her. I've been following her on Twitter for a while. She's well, since the
I don't
beginning.
know her.
She's an entrepreneur. She owns a company. I think she's done a really good job of building her company in spite of the invasion. Left the country for a while. I mean, I've been following her life on Twitter. She's always been very pro-Ukraine, very supportive of the defense efforts and President Zelensky. And so this morning I was stunned when I read this tweet from her. Our government knew about the war. They simply haven't told us. She means they didn't tell us in the past. Their justification is so poor that I cannot stop wondering what we should do with them when this is all over. And I'm wondering, is this a common sentiment throughout the country about, we're beginning to look at the past and say we're not happy with how the war began and how the president and his cabinet responded, and that we should actually be thinking about replacing them?
First of all, I want to say that current polls suggest that the nation is united behind Zelensky. Before the war started, his approvals were at like 25-30%. Actually, Ukrainians, they like how Zelensky handled the war. Yeah, there are a lot of questions to what preceded the war. And yes, it's the scandal which is ongoing in Ukraine for the third day, which was started by Washington Post. Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah.
And obviously it was started because Washington Post wanted to promote the wise government of the United States, the wise administration and the wise president of the United States at the eve of upcoming elections. They wanted to say that's the
You are, of course, you are, of course, suggesting, or I'm even going to say accusing the one of the most respected newspapers in the country of lobbying for the current president.
I think that's pretty obvious. It's not that I was accused.
I just want to be clear that that's what you're saying. Okay.
I think that Washington Post and New York Times and CNN, they became totally partisan media outlets, and that's very bad. They didn't start this. Fox was ahead of them. But I think that's not good that they followed the law. Anyway, I think that again in the United States it was something which was dictated by the internal politics, but it's obviously backfired in Ukraine because if United States relayed all the information properly, all the intel on the upcoming invasion to Ukrainians, then why didn't Ukraine, I don't know, prepare it better for it, forewarn their citizen and etc. And Zelensky's point all the time was the same. That's guys, we had certain reports that were coming from the US side. They were never supported by any intel behind them. They were just the conclusions that guys, beware, Putin is gonna attack. there were several dates announced, and none of those dates worked in the past. And what could we do in this situation? We could say to our citizens, look, the war is imminent, and then provoke the panic, and then we don't know whether it happened or it won't happen. Plus, the panic would significantly decrease the chances of winning the war, because it would disrupt all the normal operations of the economy and of the national infrastructure, etc., etc., etc. And obviously, we preferred to be optimistic that the war would not happen, but at the same time, quietly do certain preparational moves. And for example, I personally was comparing on Ukrainian live shows with look how Soviet Union started the war with Hitler in 1941, when the majority of the military equipment was destroyed on the ground, being hit by German bombers. And in Ukrainian case, virtually no significant losses were incurred by the initial attack of Russian missiles and aircrafts. Not a single jet fighter was lost on the ground. Not a single military equipment storage was destroyed. Nothing. Why? Because they were prepared. And even in this report by Washington Post, they were saying that U.S. intelligence actually warned Ukrainians that the key object in the very first day would be Hostomel airport, where Russians would try to deploy the troopers, and that would be like the platform to capture Kiev. And the Ukrainians were prepared, and they totally destroyed all those guys that tried to capture the airport, and it never happened. And I think that was really the most decisive fight in the very first days of war. So I cannot say that I blame Zelensky for something, but obviously Zelensky has powerful political enemies, primarily associated with the former President Poroshenko, who is trying to use all his weaknesses. And in general, because Ukrainians, the feature of the nation is that they are very humanistic. They really value the human life. They very much like Jews in this regard. And that's why it's very, very, very easy to speculate on this topic. Why you didn't warn us? Because it was impossible to do.
It also seems to me, and a lot of this is based on, frankly, the conversations you and I have been having here. And also, I've been steeped very much in the life and the thoughts of Ilya while editing a book, right? For you. It seems to me that no matter how President Zelensky in Ukraine responded in the days before the invasion, no matter what they did, there was going to be possible that there would be an interpretation that it was the wrong response. And that no matter what the response was, there was going to be a way that it was going to ultimately be beneficial for Putin, in that the disruption was inevitable in the design of the plan on the Russian side.
And internally, it's the politics. And obviously, there would be a lot of people who would speculate on this. And the only way to stop speculation is to win the war.
Yeah.
And who would win the war, would wipe out all the accusations. If Ukraine is victorious, and I would say not if, but when Ukraine is victorious, all those discussions would be rendered totally irrelevant. If such an impossible thing would happen and Ukraine would lose, those discussions would also be totally irrelevant, right? Because Zelensky would not survive this.
Yeah. When you read the Washington Post story that you're mentioning, and I'm sorry I don't have a link to it, I should have thought of that. One of the things that came to mind for me is that even though the U.S. and some other countries were warning Ukraine about this and giving some support, they weren't giving adequate support to do anything defensively. So I look at what has happened from the days before the invasion to today, and I think, it's been handled brilliantly, in that the country didn't fall in 3 days. And instead, the support has only been growing and growing and growing. And the hardware that's been required has, continued to roll in and accumulate. That's the only way Ukraine could be where it is today.
No, absolutely. And, this article in Washington Post, obviously, it's completely apologetical to the current administration in the White House. But there is one very logical question. What did United States, if they knew about what was going to happen, what they actually did to prevent this from happening? A lot of diplomacy, okay, Burns warning Putin, don't do nothing, and I know Burns, I know the way he could have spoken to Putin.
Yes.
In this sense, he is an extremely diplomatic person.
His role is minus up his role.
He's the current chief of CIA, and previously he was U.S. ambassador in Moscow, so I know him very well from that times.
Yeah.
And again, this is a professional diplomat. He speaks, very vaguely, and very, very, very soft. That's his character. He is a very cautious person. So I don't believe that Putin would have taken any statement which would come from him with all due respect. He's a great guy, but just psychologically, it would not have much of impact.
Yeah.
And okay, now we are saying that United States may think that supplying certain weapons to Ukraine would be supplying weapons in the zone of an active military conflict, and that can provoke Russians to do this and that. But in the situation before the war, they could have supplied whatever, say, anti-missile defense, and that would be a purely defensive thing, right? It's not an offensive thing.
Yes.
Anti-missile defense, and that would totally disrupt Russian plans if there would be a massive deployment of anti-missile defense in Ukraine and other protective things. Even Washington Post admit that the only military advice that the United States was giving to Ukraine in days before the war was the advice that Secretary Blinken gave: dig trenches, guys. And that's the only thing. And at the beginning of war, in the first month, United States were sending to Ukraine not some heavy equipment. They were saying javelins. They were saying sending other, like stingers, like other stuff like that. Basically, they were equipping Ukrainian army for a partisan war, for a guerrilla war, not for regular army confrontation, because nobody believed that the Ukrainian army would stay. But we did. And when it was clear that Ukraine cannot just fight, but win in those fights, only then the West started to deliver things that really were needed from the very first day, and not even from the first day, it was needed before the war.
Yes. Yeah. All right. I want to change gears. And since we're kind of trashing on the Washington Post anyway, let's continue. We scooped them, you and I, all of us together, because last week we talked about, I asked, and you talked about how the ban on Russians, the visa ban, was an important thing, but it shouldn't be a blanket ban, because there are people who are oppositionists who need visas to get out of the country and be safe. So following that conversation, and this is why I say we scooped the Washington Post, someone who I believe is a friend of yours, Michael McFaul, is also the former ambassador of Russia, I believe, did an opinion piece.
He's my very good friend, yes.
Your very good friend, all right. He did an opinion piece after we have this conversation. Want to underline Putin, help Russians who are opposed to the war. I mean, you scooped them by a long shot. You've created the Bravery Foundation to do exactly that. I'm sure you've read the opinion piece by him. Talk to us about that, and if you think we're beginning to see a tide toward more influencers and world leaders beginning to understand that, like you've been doing with the Bravery Foundation, there are people in Russia who need to be helped out of the country to help oppose Putin and be successful in making him go away.
There is a very difficult choice in the strategy of what to do in regards to those people who are fighting Putin in Russia. For one side, again, cynically speaking, we need troops on the ground. And in the situation of war, we should understand that there will be casualties within those troops on the ground. So we need those partisans, we need this resistance. We need people who would be fighting with Putin in Russia, understanding that some of them would pay a dear price for this. And Mike McFaul and many other liberally minded Russians, they're saying, oh, no, it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous to stay in Russia. It's too dangerous to confront Putin. It's the guaranteed path to jail. And that's why it's better to help those Russians who are opposition-minded to be exfiltrated outside the country. And I'm not even saying that what Zelensky absolutely correctly suggested, that 99% of those Russians who live in Russia after the beginning of war had nothing to do with the opposition. They wanted to leave Russia just because it became uncomfortable to stay there. And there was shrinking economy and the problem with jobs and many other issues. So they wanted to go somewhere else, but not because they were freedom fighters. But even if we take separately just this segment of people who are truly opposition minded, for Ukraine, we need them to stay in Russia. And we need them to stay and fight. And Ukrainians, they take way larger risks on themselves, because those Ukrainians who are fighting in the front lines, they can be killed. And those Russians who are fighting inside Russia, they at maximum can go to jail. And, if we assume that the revolution would be coming and any change of the regime would be coming, so it's temporary thing. I think it's not fair to say that we Russians should not take the risk of fighting with our own regime, while Ukrainians should take this risk. It's not fair. From the other side, we definitely need to put a lot of effort to protect those people who already got engaged in the fight. We don't need unwanted casualties, right? And if we understand that the person already, I don't know, threw Molotov cocktail in the police car, or I don't know, planted a mine under railroad tracks,
or the drone that took out the power plant,
or whatever. Yes, that the help disrupt military operations, and then FSB is chasing this guy. We definitely need to help this guy to stay alive and to be exfiltrated. And when I'm saying stay alive, I mean it literally, because yesterday, two of our comrades, Russian partisans, were killed by FSB in Volgograd region. They were just shot dead when they tried to create an attack on one of the infrastructure objects in Russia. So the danger is quite real. And obviously, we need to protect those people, as well as we need to protect those people who are not partisans, but who made large profile, important symbolic actions, like we protected, say, Marina Ovsyannikova, the lady who rebelled against the propaganda machine in the live show First TV channel. I'm returning to her because she is one of the most controversial figures in the opposition. Sometimes say that she is an agent of KGB herself, but at the end of the day, what she has done was so useful, and it provoked a lot of propaganda people to resign. That's why I think that she definitely made a very important and useful step. And obviously, we do need to protect her and others like her and others like our dear partisans who are fighting in Russia. And for this, we created this our Bravery Foundation, which specifically helps those people to be exfiltrated from Russia, to get protected from the security, that we provide the legal assistance for those who were already imprisoned or somehow captured by Russian security forces. But we definitely don't want to invite people to leave Russia. We
Yeah.
are saying, that if something happens, don't be afraid. There would be people on your side who would come and help you. But please fight first.
All right. So I have a really challenging question for you. And we've talked about this before. In fact, you brought it up, and we talk about it a lot in the book. Are there, well, I'm not going to say are there, how many good Russians are there? What is the, we hear these percentages of 80, 90% of Russians don't even care about the war in Ukraine. What do you think those numbers really are? What is really the attitude of the large segments of the Russian population?
Well, I would say this way, and that's what is being supported by the actual polls and surveys on the Russian audience. I would say 15% are radically pro-war, 15% are radically against the war, and the rest 70%, they more or less like Gaussian curve. They are the observers, with half tend to be anti-war and half tend to be pro-war, more or less like this. And this in 70%, they are largely motivated by social and economic considerations. They think about their lives and they don't think about Ukrainians.
Yeah.
And in general, they don't think they can influence the government's decisions, influence Putin's decisions. And they, okay, well, this is something that those guys decide that they know better. If Putin wants to fight, let him fight. If Putin wants to stop fighting, let him stop fighting. If Putin wants to attack them with missiles, let him attack with missiles. If he wants to commit suicide, let him commit suicide. They will support everything because they understand they have no authority over his decisions. And that's actually where the struggle starts, because Russian propaganda is trying to pull this cloud into their favor and say, okay, if you agree that whatever Putin is doing is right, say it in public, that you are for the war. We, from our side, we want to pull them in our direction, saying like, guys, look, this war ruining your lives, it's ruining your income, it's ruining healthcare system in Russia, it kills your neighbors and members of your own families. So let's stop this, because not because we should like Ukrainians, but just because we should like ourselves.
Yes. The scenario you describe of the 15% on one side, the 15% on the other, and the 30 in the middle, and 70% in the middle, that kind of just go with the flow. Do you think that that's pretty much the same in the United States and other European countries? I mean, are you describing something that's unique to Russia, or can we just look around and go, oh yeah, that's pretty much how things work at where I live too?
In one sense, it's very much the same. From other sense, there is one thing which is significantly different. And what is significantly different is this feeling of apathy among the 70%. And really, it was like even such an exercise. What I was saying that, people would support whatever they have been told to support. I'm not joking. It was a sociological survey, that the same group of people was asked if Putin would say that we should continue fighting, 66% said yes. If Putin would say we should stop fighting, 62% was saying yes. If Putin would say we should kill all Ukrainians, 61% was saying yes. If Putin would say that we should sign a peace treaty with Ukraine guaranteeing their territorial integrity, 67% were saying yes. So they just don't care because they understand that it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Not part of their lives. And this is what is different from the West, because in the West, people understand that they can influence things, at least to a certain degree. And in this situation, they just cannot.
Yeah. Well, to go back to the tweet from Alexander Zubal, one of the comments to her was, "You live in a democracy. You get to vote at the ballot box." And Russians do get to vote, wink, wink, right? I mean, but their votes don't really count. So at least in today's scenario, I want to call
it was a famous Soviet time joke that was even quoted once by President Reagan. So when Russian Secretary General and American President met, and Russian president asked Americans, "So why you criticize us that we don't have democracy in our country?" And the American president was saying, it's very easy, in our country, everybody could come in front of the White House and say, fuck US president. And Russian Secretary General saying, yeah, everybody could come to Kremlin and say, fuck US president, no problem. So that's...
There was also a famous joke from Ronald Reagan about, I think, 3 dogs. And the 3 dogs are saying, something, I can't do it exactly, but, when you ask your master for a bone, when you bark to ask your master for a bone, you get a bone. And one dog says,
German says, what is bark? And the Russian says, what is bone? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to call your attention to a message here from Trisha. She says, when Crimea was attacked, the Russian tourists freaked out and left. If explosions like that happened just out of Moscow, do you think it would change the mindset of people because now it would be in their own backyard?
Something would definitely change. No, really. And it would change significantly. The biggest question mark, which frankly speaking, I can't be certain, is in which direction.
Mm-hmm.
Because from one side, obviously we will destroy the feeling of invulnerability for Russians. They would understand that the war is here at their doorstep. But at the same time, what would be the conclusion? I'm afraid that the conclusion would rather be that we need to forget about our differences with Putin. We need to forget who was right and wrong in the first place. We should get united to protect ourselves from the invasion. I believe that would be a more popular sentiment, that the sentiment to actually confront Putin. That's why I think that it's very important that all those violent attacks inside Russia and the disruption of stability, which I think is critically important to remove Putin from the office, that's a prerequisite that people should understand that there is no stability anymore. I think it should be done clearly by Russians. It should not be done by outside bombings, missiles, NATO, Ukrainians, whoever. It should be done by Russians. And it should be very clear for all Russians that it's ourselves who are doing this, because we cannot stand this no more. And that they have nobody to fight with, but with ourselves.
Is it clear that those attacks is it clear to your typical or average Russian that those attacks are being perpetrated by other Russians?
In terms of partisan war, I think yes, because they are pretty redundant and useless from the military standpoint by Ukrainians. So I never saw that, people were saying that no, that these were Ukrainian attacks. Ukrainian attacks were clearly happening in Crimea. That obviously, Ukrainians, obviously, it was not how Russian Ministry of Defense suggested that, it was some smoking, it was an accident, spontaneous detonation of the ammunition, no. It was clear that it was a Ukrainian attack. But what's happening inside the country, at the end of the day, in the backs of their minds, Russians did understand that Crimea is not ours, that it's Ukrainian, and they would say that it should be rightfully ours. At the same day, it was something that we captured from Ukraine, so it was fair that
Oops. Well,
it would be different.
we lost you there for a minute, Ilya.
I said that if the attacks will come on the mainland Russia, it would be totally different.
Before I let you go, is there anything else you want to add today?
I want to say that next week, and it would be before we meet again, on the 24th of August, it would be Ukraine's national holiday, Independence Day. It would be Ukrainians' 4th of July. But it's a fate, right? Because it would be also 6 months anniversary of the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. So everybody will be coming to Russian embassies across the globe to protest. And we are calling all our friends in other countries to take white, blue and white flag and come alongside with Ukrainians to those embassies. And if you guys who are watching us would be willing to join or just to disseminate this information, I would greatly appreciate this, and happy holidays.
I'm glad you made us aware of that. And I want to encourage everyone as well. This is, not only can we go, but as Ilya said, I mean, the power of communication, particularly through social media, how many bodies can your body multiply into out of whatever Russian embassy is closest to you? Ilya, I want to thank you for being here.